Well, we finally got our first frost, and I will show you guys around what it looks like now this morning. I believe it got down to 19 degrees last night. So it's finally killed off a lot of these cover crops. It's a sad morning, but I knew it was coming. So you can see here the buckwheat flowers and everything is really wilted. Everything just has some frost on it. So you can really see here all the frost. So you can see that this cabbage that I took out, I seeded it real quick and it actually popped up just enough, which it's still going to feed my soil now that it's frosted out here. Whenever it does kill off, there will still be stuff in my soil for it to feed on, but really not enough to cover this bare soil, so I'm going to throw some chopped up leaves on this row whenever we start mulching up some leaves. You can see the watermelon and pumpkin patch. It's definitely laying over. So once we get like more rain and some snow to lay all this down, it'll be a really good cover. You can just see all the frost on all of this stuff. So here's the leek. They look a little wilted on the tops, but still standing. And then over here into the tomato buckets, you just see they're all laying down. All the cover crop has laid over. There's frost on the tips of everything. But I'm very proud of these tomato buckets. They got really, the cover crop got really tall. I'm going to compare you to the flower row up front. So looking at how tall these really have got. And then I'll take you over to the flower row. So looking at this front flower row, this is more of our native soil. So this actually didn't grow that much taller, and I actually seeded this way before the tomato buckets. So you can just tell a difference in the soil. I'm still working on getting this soil healthy, because this one does have some good soil that I ordered in it, but it's more of our just regular soil that we had on this ground. So I'm hoping by next year, by feeding this soil with cover crop over and over, building it up, throwing compost in, I'm hoping that this will get better over time. So these squash rows have definitely grown really well. The pumpkins are still haven't really turned orange. So you can see there's one right here. It's barely starting to turn orange. And then this one is barely starting to turn. to see how tall that row is. That's the very first row that I seeded. It's very tall. So what I'm gathering for next year, I need to seed everything by the first week of September to get, if I want it to get this tall. This is the very first row, and this row right here wasn't too far after I seeded the very first row, and they got really tall. And then this one right here. So next year, if we have time to rip out our pumpkins and watermelon, which it could be, it might not happen for the watermelon and pumpkin patch because we might still have pumpkins growing next year. But I need to write down that I need to seed everything by the 1st of September so everything can get at least tall enough. That way, whenever it falls over, there'll be plenty of ground cover to cover all the soil. I mean, this is just fine. I mean, it's not as tall, but a lot of this is like that daikon radish in the very front here. And then the back was more of the buckwheat, because I kind of ran out of seed whenever I was seeding all this. It's just a big mixture of everything, so I'm not worried about it. It's totally fine. The ground will be covered. So I really need to take the sprinklers off. You can just hear what the frost did last night. Everything's froze. This is what I had set up. I have 4 of these on T-post. Just these really cheap sprinkler heads, and I just tied it on with some wire and hooked on the water hose. So like there's 2 on one section of the garden and then 2 on the back section of the garden. But I might be changing that next year. I might be going to soaker hoses next year, but we'll see. I know it's expensive. I have actually bought a kit, but I need to buy another kit to cover the whole entire garden. And it can get pretty expensive. That's why I used I've always done this with all of our gardens ever since we started gardening, is put our sprinklers on T-posts. It's very cost effective and works fairly well, but some of the rows that are close to the sprinklers, they intend to get really soaked, and some of the plants get really overwatered and waterlogged. So that's the only reason why I want to start using soaker hoses next year. But we'll see how everything goes next year cost wise. So who knows, I might be going back to the sprinkler, but I really want to switch it out and try the soaker hoses so my things will stay really from getting waterlogged. So this will probably be one of the last views of the green since we got our really hard frost last night. And tonight it's actually going to get a little bit colder. It's supposed to be 19 degrees, so it'll probably wipe most of this out by tomorrow. So I'm out here feeding the chickens this morning, and it's a few weeks later since our hard frost that we had. It actually has warmed up these past couple weeks, like really hot. But I just wanted to show you guys kind of what it looks like now, like how dead it looks. It definitely looks like a winter garden now. But after I feed the chickens, I'm going to turn you guys around here and I'm going to show you what it looks like. So we're actually in the middle of deer season right now. And it's actually been really warm this year for deer season, but we haven't had any rain either in a couple weeks. We're actually probably gonna get some rain this Sunday and Monday and Tuesday, I hope. But it's actually cold, a little cooler today finally. It's actually been in the 70s and 80s for a couple weeks after our hard frost that we had. But But you can see behind me how everything looks dead. And I just wanted to show you guys what it looks like, and I'm going to turn you around so we can go inside the garden and look and see what all it looks like. You can see some of the stuff is still pretty green and some of the stuff is pretty dead. Alright, so I pulled up some of my row covers. I really need to just roll these up and take them into the garage. I got a lot of my hoses laid out here. I need to go put those in the greenhouse to winterize them. Okay, so coming into the garden, you can see a few things are still green. A lot of these things are the radishes, but everything else is pretty much dead. And then looking over in here at the watermelon and pumpkin patch, you can totally see where I seeded these at the same time. That little corner that I had here of squash that was still growing. So a lot of this stuff is actually, since we're having these warm days, is still pretty green. But most of the stuff that I seeded long before all this is dead now. You can see here some of the oats are still pretty green. We haven't fully had really cool weather. We did there for like the first frost that first week, but I think next week maybe we're gonna start getting back down into the 30s at night. And a lot of my cabbages got ruined from the frost. It's totally fine. I'm gonna give it to the chickens. And this is some of my cauliflower that didn't do very good. So a lot of the stuff I will be picking out and giving it to the chickens. And I cleaned out this row. So I just honestly need to probably throw down some compost and kind of feed the soil a little bit, and then I need to cover it with mulched up leaves. Here's another flower row. I got my lettuce growing underneath here. Let's take a look here. Oh, it's looking so good. Look at that. There's arugula in there, lettuce heads. Let's see if I can get a better look. Oh yeah, everything's looking great. And then I have a winter variety of lettuce down here. You can kind of see the wind move my tunnel a little bit. You can see that they're not as big yet. I seeded these a couple weeks after. It looks like I need to probably reseed some of the rows, little holes. So it might have got too hot for some of those on those hot days that we had. Then turning over here, this is my green onions. I actually need to trim this all down. And then the leek is actually still standing. It's my little experiment. And then looking down here, you can see the tomato buckets have stayed green. Look at all that green. So that's really good that they're continuing to grow still. So I'll have that much more time of them feeding my soil as they are living plants right now. And then looking at the asparagus, it's starting to die off. And the celery that I had in here, it got bit by the frost, which is fine. I have a ton in my freezer. And then the squash row, Still pretty green. I ended up ripping out my pumpkins, so I need to cover these with leaves on the ends of the row. But I'm really happy with how everything looks. I'm excited for next year. Looking really good. I think next week is Thanksgiving week, so this is what the garden looks like in the middle of November. Alright, coming into the berry patch, just taking a look here if I need to start putting straw on these strawberries yet, which not yet. They are still pretty green. Once 50% or more have died off or look dead, they're not really necessarily dead. They just go in dormant. I will start covering them in straw, but they're still green. I was thinking closer to Thanksgiving is when I'll need to start covering these. But I'm just going to keep an eye on them since we have been having these warm days. We haven't really had, we only probably had 2 hard frosts, so I'm just going to keep an eye on that, and I'll be covering them soon. You can see all the leaves that we are going to be mulching soon after deer season. Deer season is actually a pretty busy time for me and my husband. We like to hunt. We like to fill our freezer up with deer meat. We process it ourselves. So look at this. This is our circle driveway. We got so many leaves on the ground right now. So starting probably next week or the week after, we are going to be mulching up all of this and composting every bit of it and covering our garden rows. Beautiful oak leaves everywhere on the ground. So we ended planting garlic finally. I'm probably about 8 days late planting my garlic, which is totally fine. It's just 8 days. So I just roughed up the soil, and then we did a soil test in spring, so I have to amend what the soil needs, which is gypsum, just calcium to put into my soil. Luckily, that's the only thing really that my soil test results said that I needed to add. So about like every 3 to 4 months I add some calcium, and I mix that in. Then we kind of break up the soil, mix all that calcium inside the soil. And then I'm very proud because this year and last year, but this year I had a huge harvest of garlic, and I get to plant every bit of what we grown this year. And I just hope that I planted enough this year. Kind of going off what I planted last year, might be a few less. I think we did 4 to each little row. I think I did more last year, so I'm really hoping that I planted enough. But we have a ton of garlic for winter time still. So basically you just break apart your garlic heads, and you try to keep the little paper that's on the garlic on. You don't want to peel any of that off. And you just plant it like 2 to 4 inches into your soil and then cover it up. We worked on this probably for a couple hours trying to get all this planted. It was really hot this day, but we just took our time, made sure we planted it the right depth, And it was really cool this year. Once we got done, we went to our compost pile and we had our compost that was fully finished, and we just started to shovel some into our wheelbarrow, and we were going to just sprinkle all of our fresh compost on top of the garlic row. You know, just give it that nutrients and everything that it needs through the winter time. Very proud of how this compost has turned out. We worked really hard on this, and this took probably, I would say maybe 5 months to get this fully done. I think it was early spring whenever we started turning this compost right here. We always make sure we put the pallet back up so raccoons and all kinds of animals will stay out of it. And sometimes our cows go back there, so I don't want them going through it. This fall we're actually going to be adding 2 more compost bins, so I'm really excited about that. We'll be doing a video later on about that. But my husband put on a layer of compost on the top of the garlic row, and then once I'm done with this row, like I said, it's still deer season right now, but the next week or the week after that we are going to be mulching up all of our leaves, and I will be putting a really thick layer of leaves on top of this row. That's what I did last year and it worked out perfectly. So this is what it looks like. Happy how it turned out.